Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. It's good to see so many of you here. We're going to hold on just for a minute while a few more people get settled in. All right, it is 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. For anyone just hopping on, you're in luck. We are recording this and we'll send it to you after our session. Let's go ahead and jump in. So I wanted to take a quick moment to introduce myself. I'm Morgan Lee, and I work on the business development team here at Tax 990. My focus is helping nonprofits to find the right filing solution and for the way that their team will actually use it. I'm not flying solo today. Later in the webinar, I'll be handing things over to Josie. She's our tax analyst, and she's an enrolled agent who works directly with nonprofits day in and day out. She brings some serious compliance expertise to the table, so you're going to want to stick around for that. This webinar is for educational purposes only and focuses on IRS e-file requirements and nonprofit best practices. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to add them to our chat so we can address them during that time. And we'll also have an additional Q&A at the end of the webinar. All right. On today's agenda, we're going to cover several different things. We're going to cover why Form 990 EZ matters, understanding the key sections, reading revenue and expense reporting, interpreting the balance sheet, additional reporting areas, and common mistakes and compliance risks. We'll also talk about the impact through the filing. Okay, so let's dive in. Before you begin your 990 EZ filing, take a few minutes to gather everything that you'll need. Have your financial records, governing documents, employee and officer information, as well as any supporting details for your revenue, expenses, and balance sheet items ready. A quick checklist at the start can save time, reduce errors, and make the 990 EZ process much smoother. All right, on the checklist, you'll want to gather your year-end financial statements. This would include your income statement and balance sheet. You'll want to have your chart of accounts and bank statements on hand. And you'll also want to collect board and officer information, such as their names, title, and addresses. Prepare your payroll summary and a copy of your W-3. Pull documentation for major grants, contributions, and revenue sources. Identify party transactions or special activities. Any related party transactions would include parents and subsidiaries, affiliates, key management personnel. Make a list of any changes in activities or governance, such as board positions. All right, so I'm going to bring Josie to the stage. We're going to dive into why Form 990 EZ matters and what's at stake for your organization. And there's no one better to walk us through that than Josie, our tax analyst and enrolled agent who lives and breathes nonprofit compliance. Josie, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today. So on our next slide, so most exempt organizations are required to file a version of the Form 990. Form 990-EZ is a simplified version of the full Form 990, and it's designed for organizations that have less than $200,000 in gross receipts and less than $500,000 in assets. The return not only tells the IRS what your organization's financial situation looks like, it can also be a valuable tool for acquiring donors and fundraising. There's a lot of information on the Form 990-EZ, and your donors are likely to ask for that information. So having it is transparent, and having it available indicates your credibility. There are a few key sections to the Form 990-EZ. The header tells the IRS and other interested parties who you are and how your organization is set up. The Revenue and Expenses section shows the organization's activity throughout the year. The balance sheet indicates the financial condition of your assets, liabilities, and leftover net assets. The Program Services is your brag box to show off what your organization does and what it's accomplished. The Officers section is an overview of who the key players are for your organization. And the Other Information section is additional facts that the IRS wants to know to make sure you're compliant. The Revenue and Expense section for the Form 990-EZ shows your organization's financial activity. Your income and expenses are reported here, including your fundraising income, your program service revenue, investment income, donations, and contributions, as well as any other source of revenue that the organization has. The expense section is more compact than the revenue section. Revenue has line items for most types of activity that you'll see, as well as a line for anything that this section doesn't already list out. The expense section is mainly grants paid, salaries, contractor fees, professional fees, occupancy expenses, printing and postage expenses, and a line for all other expenses not included. Both the other revenue and the other expense lines should be included on the Schedule O with more details. So the balance sheet is divided into 3 sections: assets, liabilities, and net assets. Together, the assets section should equal the sum of your liabilities and your net assets. Your assets include anything that the organization owns or is owed. The liabilities section shows any goods, services, or funds due to other entities. Net assets are what remain after you subtract your liabilities from your total assets, and this section is similar to the equity section that's on a for-profit balance sheet. The balance sheet on the 990-EZ is very simple, and you can indicate if you'd like to explain any of the line items in more detail on the Schedule O, which might be a good idea if you show your return to potential donors. The balance sheet at the beginning of the year should match the end of the year balance sheet on last year's return. And the activity that you see from your income and expenses is reported on the change of the balance sheet between the beginning and end of the year. We're now going to be taking a look at a demo within Tax 990. The balance sheet is located at the top of the second page on Form 990-EZ. There are 3 lines for the assets section: line 22 for cash, savings, and investments, line 23 for land and buildings, and line 24 for all other assets. In Tax 990, you can enter your other assets by clicking the green Add Info button to the left of the gray field. And the liabilities are entered the same way on line 26. Any details that you enter into the Add Info section will also show on the Schedule O. And you can add information to the Schedule O by clicking on the hyperlink at the top of the page. Make sure to enter your balance sheet at both the beginning and end of the year to show how the organization's financial position has changed over time. The total assets, total liabilities, and net assets are all calculated for you for your convenience. Tax 990 will indicate to you if your balance sheet does not balance or if it does not align with your income and expenses.
All
So
right. Oh, I think we have a question, Josie. I'll read it off to you. So the question is from MW. Thank you for posting your question in the chat, by the way. It says, if our net assets at beginning of the year doesn't perfectly match last year's net assets end of year, what do we do?
So that's usually an indication that there's a mismatch in your financial reporting and in your financial statements. The end of the year balance sheet is carried over immediately to the beginning of the year balance sheet. So it's like the next day balance sheet, which means that there shouldn't be too much of a difference in between. And if there is, there's likely some kind of transaction that's either been double counted or something has been taken off or deleted unnecessarily. So if you do have a mismatch at any point in your tax return when you're looking at the balance sheet, I highly recommend going back and taking a look at the individual transactions that might be contributing to that. One big tip that I recommend is seeing how much that difference is and looking for transactions that matches that exact difference.
Great. Thank you so much, Josie. There is one more from Patrick. And let's see, it says, on the 990, where do we report disposition of assets during the year?
Yeah, so on the 990 EZ, you can report any major disposition of assets on the Schedule O. That would be something that if your balance sheet is drastically different from last year, you would want to report that on the Schedule O. On the full Form 990, you can report disposition of assets on the Schedule D as well. And then if it's a major disposition of assets, like more than 25% of your company's net worth, then you'll want to file the Schedule N with the 990. And that can be filed with both the EZ and the full Form 990.
Perfect. And we have one more from Alexandria. And she says, what if it's $1 off?
If it's $1 off, it's probably a rounding error. If absolutely necessary, you're confident that everything's correct, what you can do is you can go in and make a change to other changes in net assets and report it as a prior period adjustment. I recommend being very careful with that because if you do it without reconciling your accounts and making sure that you are as accurate as possible, it can result in mismatches in your financial accounting. So use it sparingly, but you can make a prior period adjustment by going into other changes in net assets.
Perfect. All right. Well, we are going to continue.
Yeah. So the program service accomplishments and exempt purpose. This is your way of showing off how much your organization does. And it's a great way to show the IRS that you're fulfilling your organizational purpose. And it's a great way to show the donors the cause that you're supporting. Your officers, directors, trustees, and key employees show who's in charge of your decision making and who's most highly compensated among your employees. This information is a section with various questions to make sure you're operating according to the IRS's rules and regulations. And you may also have schedules and attachments which give additional information on how your organization receives support, certain transactions, fundraising events, and a section for any additional details from other parts of your return.
All right. And Josie, we have one more question from,
Sure.
Perfect. R. Jennings. Do I need to be very specific on the program service accomplishments?
That's at your discretion, but I recommend being fairly specific just because this is a section that both the IRS is going to look at to make sure that when you filed your nonprofit exemption request, you wrote down an organizational purpose. And so the IRS will look at your program services and say, okay, this is in line with that purpose. The other thing is that donors look at this. A lot of times you'll submit a copy of your return with your grant requests. And so this, I mean, I said it earlier, this really is your brag box. Talk about how great your organization is, how many people you help. I see a lot of organizations that list statistics in this section, and I think that's a great way to help. A recommendation would be how many people your cause has impacted, or how much revenue you've raised on behalf of a cause. Just any statistics that you can include that show off how your program, how your organization is serving its organizational purpose. There's also an overflow section, so anything that's not reported on the page 2 of the 990 Easy, or it's part 3 on the full 990, you can carry that over onto the Schedule O. The Schedule O is an overflow section for any part of the return that needs more information. So if you really want to get into the great things that your organization's doing, you have more room than is on page 2.
Perfect. And we have one from MW. What parts of the 990 Easy are not required to be made available for public inspection?
So most of the 990 Easy is available for public inspection. The biggest thing that you'll see redacted is the Schedule B, which has your donor information on it. They allow you to redact the donor contact information, specifically for public charities. Private foundations have different rules on that, but for public charities, the Schedule B donors are going to be redacted.
Thank you, Josie.
Yeah.
There is one more, and then we'll move on. From Carrie. If a board member leaves before the end of the year, how do you reflect them on the board information?
On the 990 Easy, you'll still, on both the 990 and the 990 Easy, you're going to still reflect all officers that served on the board at any point in the year. The 990 gets a little bit more specific and has beginning and ending dates for when their term was. And then on the 990 Easy, you can emphasize that again on the Schedule O.
Perfect. Thank you, Josie.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to move on to communicating impact through the filing.
Yeah. So just remember that your organization, you're filing a tax return, but it's not just a tax return. It really speaks to what your organization and what your cause is. And it shows more than just how you report your income, expenses, assets, and liabilities. It's painting a whole picture, which is why being clear and detailed is important. So keep in mind that you have your whole section on the return dedicated to talking about how great your programs and outreach are. And you might be submitting a tax return in grant applications, or donors will look it up online. So just show how passionate you are about the cause when you're putting your return together.
All right. So that is going to bring us to the end of the main portion in today's presentation. Josie, thank you so much for your insight and guidance you shared today. It was so valuable. And I know that our attendees watching will walk away today with a lot of great information. Before we let everyone go, I want to make sure you know exactly how to take your next steps with Tax 990. When you are ready to get started, head over to tax990.com. Create your free account. It only takes a couple of minutes, and then you're able to add your organization details and jump right in with your filings. Our support team is made up of real people who are genuinely here and happy to help. You can reach us in several different ways: by phone, email, or through the live chat on the website. However you prefer to connect, we've got you covered. And our goal is just to make sure that your filing experience is smooth and stress-free. We have tons of resources available. If you ever need anything, let us know. Our knowledge base is a great place to start. It's filled with quick answers, form guidance, and the latest updates on filing requirements. We also have a YouTube channel with step-by-step videos that will walk you through the process, along with a full blog of helpful tips and insights. All right, and let's do a quick Q&A if anybody didn't get a chance to ask a question or if anything sparked a question. Now is your time. So go ahead and drop your questions and we will get to those. Okay. All right. We have one from Sarah. What is the best way to determine exchange versus non-exchange membership income?
So I want to make sure I'm understanding what you mean by that. Are you talking about when a membership has benefits that are provided in exchange for the membership dues?
We'll give her just a minute to answer us. She said yes.
Great. I would make sure that you're flagging that when you're reporting your income. So it depends on how you're doing your bookkeeping. If you're doing it in a software like QuickBooks or Sage, they let you make notes on your transactions. They let you flag your transactions, and they let you have subcategories. So if you have, membership tiers where some of your dues have benefits associated with it and some of them don't, I would put those in completely separate categories so that you can distinguish between those on your financial statements. I would even recommend putting those on different program service lines so that you can distinguish between what revenue had expenses associated with it and what was just straight up member dues to support the organization. Remember to make notes in your transactions too. You can't go wrong with making as many detailed notes as you can, just because if anything comes up, if you're looking at your year-end financial statements and you're like, I don't remember what this was for, your notes are going to be saving the day.
Absolutely. All right, and we have one from MW again. It says, if we discovered a bookkeeping error from a previous year that we corrected this year, should we report that on Schedule O?
I'm always a big fan of disclosing corrections. Just like we talked about earlier, that could be reported as a prior period adjustment that you put on the other changes to net assets section. And I always, always, always recommend that you explain what that difference was. Even if it's just $1 difference for a rounding error, having that explanation saves it from being a red flag. So yes, definitely report that on the Schedule O.
All right. And one from Ginger. We received a confirmation that the IRS received our tax return for 2024, but when I checked the IRS, it doesn't reflect that it has been received.
Unfortunately, the IRS is not always super fast about updating their information. If you have the filing confirmation, that's great. Keep that. I hesitate to tell you to contact the IRS because I know it's such a hassle, but if there's any question as to whether or not your tax return is actually showing on file, I do think it's a good idea to reach out to the IRS with a copy of the confirmation and just make sure that they have it on their records to avoid any notices that you might be getting, any questions from donors about why it's not showing up on record searches. The IRS has several databases within its system, and so sometimes it'll show on one database, but it won't carry over to the other database, and the IRS has to go in and manually correct that.
And just to kind of piggyback off that, one good thing about Tax 990 is that it has an acceptance letter right on your dashboard, so you can always take that as confirmation as well. So that's something that's kind of helpful and convenient when you do file with us. Let's see. All right. Jerry says, did I get it right? A board member who left before the fiscal year end must still be reported on the list of board members.
Yes. Because they're part of your governance team. And so we want to be really clear about the people who are influencing your organization's decision making and who might have had an impact on your financial reporting, approving financial transactions. A lot of boards in their bylaws will state that the board members have to approve budgets or financial statements or the tax return before anything is submitted. And so you had people on your board who had an influence in that. You want the IRS to know about that. You want your donors to know about that, just so that you can be held accountable and you can be completely transparent.
Great. And then, thank you, Josie.
Yeah.
R. Jennings has a question. If our gross receipts were exactly $200,000, but our assets were exactly $500,000, are we still eligible for the 990 EZ, or do we have to move up to the full 990 form? Also, is there a grace period if we only exceed the limit by a small amount?
This is such a great question because it covers a few things that I love to mention. So yes, if gross receipts are exactly 200,000 and assets are exactly 500,000, you do need to bump it up to the full 990. On the 990 EZ, there's not a grace period if you exceed the limit. There is another form called the 990N. This is for smaller organizations with gross receipts less than $50,000. The 990N is a very basic form. It's mostly got address, EIN, your signing officer on it. It's just a confirmation that your gross receipts are less than $50,000, and it fulfills your filing requirements so that your exemption status isn't revoked. Many organizations who who qualify for the 990N will still file the 990 EZ, and many organizations who qualify to file the 990 EZ will bump it up to the full 990. And the reason is because of grant applications and donor requests. Several foundations in their grant applications require you to submit a copy of your 990 or 990 EZ because it's the transparency aspect. They want to know where your money is going and how you're governing yourself. So having that additional detail is a tool that several organizations choose to use. As far as the grace period, there's not on the EZ, but on the 990N, there is a grace period. You want your the last 3 years to be an average of less than $50,000.
Thank you, Josie.
Yeah.
All right, we have one more question from MW. Our organization was officially incorporated in the middle of the year. Does our first 990 EZ need to cover the full 12 months, or do we file a short period return starting from the end date based on our IRS determination letter? Really good question here.
Yeah, that's an awesome question.
Yes, it is.
So you want your 990 EZ to cover when you started operating as a nonprofit. And so if that was in the middle of the year and that's when you started operating, even if you haven't received your determination letter yet, that's when your EZ needs to start. Mm-hmm. If you, I'm so sorry, I lost track mid-sentence. If you haven't received your IRS determination letter, but you've submitted it, or if you're operating as a nonprofit and you're working on submitting it, you still want to be filing the EZ.
Great. All right. Well, thank y'all so much for joining us today. Don't forget to register for next week's webinar. I can't talk either. Webinar, Reducing Risk and Improving Accuracy, Form 990 for Tips for Tax Professionals. You're going to learn how to spot common errors on Form 990, improve data accuracy and consistency, support nonprofit clients more efficiently, and then strengthen review processes and documentation. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.